All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Millennials World podcast. And you know what, Brian? I've been thinking, right? Of course, we're in the year 2025. I would argue, and I think you and I would both argue, Brian, that race relations in America are probably the best they've ever been. Would you agree with that?
I mean, as far as I can tell, it seems like we've kind of transcended race. I don't think anyone even notices it. We don't even think about it. Personally, I think that me and everyone I know, we don't even think about it. We don't even notice it. I don't even think I see it, to be honest. It's so outside of where we're at as a society and how we think about things that, personally, race, what? I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I don't know what you're talking
That's
about
just
either,
me.
Brian. I don't know what I'm fucking talking about. And the reason I think we both don't know what we're talking about is that race relations were solved in the late 90s, early 2000s when race movies were created. You know what I mean, Brian? Amazing movies like White Man's Burden and
Like
stuff
Speed
like
Racer,
that.
Fast and the Furious. Yeah, I know all about race movies.
But a real race movie aficionado, you might even call him a race hustler, is a guy by the name of Spike Lee. Do you know who Spike Lee is, Brian?
Well, we've been threatening the Spike Lee episode for I think over a year at this point. Yeah, I'm familiar. I've heard of the man.
Hell yeah. So you know what this week, Brian? Let's finally drop the Spike Lee bomb. So this week, we're going to be reviewing his most famous movie, Bamboozled. But before we get into our review this week, Brian, let's bring back our segment, Cringe Generational, Cringe Millennial
Cringe
Moment of the
generational moment of the week.
Woo! Yeah! And obviously we're joking about race relations and race hustling. Those things are very obviously a problem, I would even argue to this day. But you know what, Brian? Speaking of race hustlers and racism, I think this week you had the suggestion and I'm going to go along with it. I want to talk about Kanye West's new song, HH. I'm sure by other fans known as 88.
I assume that whoever still considers themselves a Kanye West fan, is probably calling it 88. I think that might have been his intent because he is pretty hip to the online far right. He's friends with Nick Fuentes now and shit. Have you heard the song, Taylor? Have you listened to it? There's not much to say about the actual song, not musically or in terms of its content, but have you heard it?
Yes, I heard it for the first time on a Sneeko, is that his name, live stream, just a little bit. I heard the full version just about 20 minutes before recording because it was just uploaded, I think, today or yesterday again, because it keeps getting taken down for odd reasons. I don't know why it keeps getting taken down.
It has not gotten taken down off of X, the Everything app, but it's been on there consistently. Kanye has even gone so far as to say that he considers X, the Everything app, the only true free speech music platform, and it's where he will be exclusively releasing all of his new albums. So this is going to be maybe something that seems out of character for me, because I know I've many times on the podcast, I've publicly said I don't really evaluate artists' personal lives or their personal conduct or their politics. It doesn't particularly enter into my evaluation of their art. It's not that we've crossed that bridge, but obviously it's over the last 5 or 6 years, but really over the last 2 years, descent that Kanye West has gone on, it's kind of something that I don't think we've ever seen from an artist on his level before. Like an artist that was so massively popular and massively influential, because he's doing all these public Nazi outbursts, which is what they are. He's just insanely anti-Semitic, insanely racist, hateful things, unequivocally, unambiguously. This is what they are. He is, for whatever reason, and I do think there's an element of mental illness and of contrarianism and all that shit that Kanye's always had to it. But he is a fascist now, and he said that many times so unequivocally that to speculate anything otherwise would be stupid. You'd be a fool to do it, right? But it's also that the music he's putting out is so... Have you noticed in these last... I don't know if you've been following these new... I don't know if you want to call them singles or whatever, as close as I have. They sound very thin. They sound like unfinished songs. It's kind of like he's actually going crazy, and the songs are just... they're not even finished. It's like they're a canvas for him to make these bizarre, this weird hodgepodge of racist politics and political turmoil. And they're all a minute and a half long. Allegedly, he didn't even write them himself. Allegedly, Dave Bluntz is writing all of his new songs. Just very weird.
Yeah, it's weird. It's very low quality. It's very slapdash. It honestly sounds like sound clown bullshit. It's not good music, and it's not, frankly, up to what was at one point. Is very no. Even though I've never been a fan of Kanye, his high caliber of production and quality, it's just dog shit. It's terrible. Yeah, it's not really even worth commenting on besides the shock factor and just being God, what a talent wasted. Seriously.
Well, and it's also that it's not worth counting on beyond the shock factor. But like I said, Dave Bluntz claims that he is writing all of these lyrics. And Kanye has kind of like made gestures online that was true. So he's like hiring ghostwriters to write. He's like telling them write some insane Nazi stuff, which also would explain maybe why the lyrics in the bars are like not. I don't want to give him any props at this point, but like, you know, the level of writing, it just isn't up to snuff with like what his lyrics used to be. It's like, oh, it's because he just hired this guy and just said, say some weird Nazi shit, and then also talk about how I'm sad. And Dave Bluntz just writes the literal lyrics, with all my money and fame, I don't get to see my children, so I became a Nazi. Which is like, what is the point of writing that? What is the statement you're making beyond like, I'm deeply unwell and hateful, pay attention to me?
Well, you know what, Brian? I think you and I can both agree that Dave Bluntz is probably the skinniest Kanye fan at this point, I would say. Would you agree with that?
Probably the skinniest Kanye fan and the least opioid addicted Kanye fan.
You know, Brian, speaking of people who are absolutely opioid addicts and Kanye fans, I think that leads perfectly into our review this week. So you had the idea to review, once again, this movie, Bamboozled. Now, this was not a movie I was familiar with, I'm going to be honest with you, in the Spike Lee oeuvre. You know, of course, I'm familiar with, you know, Do the Right Thing and Malcolm X and Jungle Fever.
And of
course, his most famous movie, the Old Boy remake, which we will certainly get into in just a moment. Not really, but just a little bit. But let's get into some details of this film real quick. So it came out in 2000. I think it came out in October of 2000. So this was just freshly in the new millennium, although they talk about scenes in this movie that this was shot in 1999 or 1998. So this is technically still a 90s movie, but it came out in 2000. And the first trivia fact I have here is that most of this film was only shot on digital mini DV camcorders, except for the actual vignettes that I'm not going to quite spoil yet because they are certainly something, but the vignettes otherwise are the only things not filmed in the like mini DV camcorder style, which is interesting because honestly, even though this was a Criterion, a Criterion release. And I'm sorry, Brian, I think I totally forgot to upload this to the drive. My apologies.
It's okay. I have it. I own it on DVD. It's fine.
Okay, perfect. So I watched the Criterion rip, which is very high quality, and it's hard to tell that this was shot on like mini camcorder because it still looks honestly pretty good.
I think the thing that gives it away that it was shot on a mini camcorder is not so much the quality, it's the staging, which kind of works because it gives it kind of a cinema verite kind of lens, but it definitely kind of like, and I think it's sort of because he's working with early digital, but also because it gives it like a faux documentary feel. Very, for a director of his level at this point, doing a film all on any sort of camcorder, it gives it a pretty distinct look, but it does look good. It doesn't look chintzy. It doesn't look like a student film.
Which is interesting because 28 Days Later, which is a movie that was also shot on like very low budget shooting equipment, looks like fucking dog shit on like HD. So it's kind of surprised. I'm kind of surprised they're able to make it look this good, to be honest with you.
Yeah, it's neither here nor there, but I actually, and I enjoyed 28 Days Later. Of course, we did an early episode on it, but I hate the way that movie looks visually. It's like everything bad about that era to me.
It looked very bad. And then this movie is rated R. It was, of course, directed by Spike Lee. It was written by him as well, and it was produced by John Keelik and Spike Lee as well. And, you know, of course, you mentioned Spike Lee. He's most famous for such movies as, you know, as you mentioned, She's Gotta Have It, Do the Right Thing, Jungle Fever, Malcolm X, Get on the Bus, this film, Inside Man, Miracle at Santa Ana, which I think is interesting, Brian, because it's a movie, and I've had this criticism of Spike Lee for a while, is that he's honestly really only good at, like, portraying American racial relations and, like, Black history. He's pretty bad at portraying basically anything else. I'm going to be honest, on a historical level, he's horrible at it. But that movie's interesting, right? Because it's a movie that chronicles Black soldiers in Italy. And you may think, oh, that's interesting. That's a different culture. It's like, no, it's Italy. They're Black. They're Black people. They're Black people housing Black Americans. Of course he's good at portraying that. He directed BlacKkKlansman as well, which, for my money, I would say is probably my favorite Spike Lee movie. I'm not sure if that's a hot take or not, but I do like that movie quite a bit.
I think that's a relatively hot take. I'm a pretty big Spike Lee fan, although I mostly agree with you. I know a lot of people like BlacKkKlansman a lot. I like it quite a bit. I think for me, I mean, to be honest, like, Do the Right Thing is my favorite Spike Lee film, and then Bamboozled by a hot second. This is very close to my favorite Spike Lee film, and it is probably the one that I am most excited to show people, because for a director of his level, it is a pretty extreme movie. And I also have kind of, you know, there's complicated things with Spike Lee's politics that I'm not necessarily, of course, the best person to get into, where he does have these pretty radical elements to his work. Like, he has a pretty strong knowledge of not just Black, like, American history, but of, like, Black radicalism in general, and, like, the development of Garveyism into, like, other radical schools of thought. But he also has, like, I wouldn't go so far as to call it reactionary, because I don't think it is. But he has kind of like, and you see a little bit of it in this movie, right? Kind of this contrarian thing that I think is just a little bit of a Gen X thing, like bubbling in him, that kind of pushes back against some of that. You see it in this movie here and there, and you see it quite a bit in his films like She's Gotta Have It. Any film that involves a lot of like, I'm just gonna say a lot of women, you see a lot of his kind of, I don't know, more regressive tendencies.
He's absolutely a misogynist, no
Yeah.
question. He's absolutely in the way that a lot lot of black radicals are, to be honest with you. Like, that's been a big criticism of black radicalism for a while, is that it's like inherently
a certain strand of
it, yes.
black radicalism. I wouldn't even say the primary, like the
no, you're totally correct. I should measure myself there. You're correct.
But I know what you mean. But you see it. He actually, I think he does, in a brief and not very well written scene, he at least tries to acknowledge that. Because let's just get it out of the way. The protagonist of this film is Spike Lee. It is who he is worried that he is becoming. Right. There is not a question in my mind that is what this film is about. It's about a world of every character in this movie is Spike Lee fighting with himself.
Yes, and once we get to the synopsis of that, I have some interesting analysis on that as well, which I do agree with you, Brian. And this movie is about 135 minutes long. It had a budget of $10 million and it grossed $2.5 million. And to be honest with you, there's no way this movie was ever going to be a box office success. It's just too extreme.
This is interesting. So I've wanted to do this for the show for a while, and I've even, I think, decided not to do other Spike Lee films and other films with similar themes because I wanted to wait to do this first. This is, I wouldn't say it's quite as radical as, so the first podcast Taylor and I ever did together was I came on one of Taylor's old programs and we talked about CSA, if you remember that. This isn't, I would say, as radical as CSA, but it's pretty close.
Yes, I would say so. And actually, there's a lot of similarities with the endings of both of these movies.
Tonally, they sort of both start as these kind of farcical, broad satires that are about real things, and they're about racism and capitalism, but they're funny and kind of silly. And kind of as you get sucked into these worlds, right, they become less funny.
Oh, yes. And trust me, this is a satire, and we'll get to the Amazon reviews, because as you can imagine, Brian, a lot of the Amazon reviews completely miss the point of this movie. Would you believe that?
I know I've told you this story, Taylor, but I'm going to tell listeners, not this film, but CSA, that's Confederate States of America. Fantastic mockumentary. It's on YouTube for free. We've done a whole podcast about it. But my dad had a copy of that movie, because he just got it somehow. And my dad is he's a total Trump guy. He has pictures of the Bushes and Ronald Reagan up in his house, right? And I'm going through visiting my dad while I'm in high school, going through his DVD collection, and I'm going, Confederate States of America, what the hell is this? And I'm thinking it's some weird, far right propaganda that my dad got sent. So I put it in, and I'm like, oh, this is this really cool kind of leftist, neo-panther, pan-Africanist, satire. And I was like, why does my dad have this? And then it dawned on me. I was like, oh, he must have seen the cover and thought, this looks funny, and then put it in and was like, what the hell?
What the hell is this libtard shit? Although your dad doesn't obviously sound quite like that.
But that would be the sentiment, right?
Yeah, no. Well, then speaking of libtards, so on Rotten Tomatoes, it has a 54% critic score and a 74% audience score. So critics were very mixed on this, which is a thing I would say in general of a lot of radical films. But audiences tend to like this movie. Once again, 74% is pretty high, although not the most disparate critic and audience reviews that we've seen. Those would be like Kurt Wimmer movies. Critics hate those movies. Although I think you and I can both agree, Brian, and I know this for a fact, that black people do love Kurt Wimmer movies.
I mean, yeah, Kurt Wimmer movies, they really strike a fucking chord with a broad swath of people. It's baffling to me. But no, we've seen the thing with some really strange and, you might say radical films not doing great critically, but doing good with their mass audience a few times. And we may have even talked about this before. With a movie like Bamboozled, I think that's because the audience that's going to see this movie, you're probably going to seek it out, right? Even though
because this movie was a big box office bomb. This movie is a big box office bomb. So if you're seeking this out, you really want to seek this out.
Yeah, you probably have an idea of what it is, because you're not going to put this on by accident, and it's probably not going to get shown on cable,
No. Oh, God. Yeah, once we get to the bomb that happens in the middle of this movie, the purpose of it, or I should say, I guess, the main focal point, holy shit. Yeah, there's no way they would ever show this on TV.
So presumably, you know who Spike Lee is. You have some interest and knowledge about, this is a film about minstrelsy. Let's just get this out of the way. I want to measure kind of the ways I talk about certain things. Obviously, neither of us are the best people to talk about this, but this is a film about neo-minstrelsy. So presumably, if you're watching this movie, you know who Spike Lee is, and you know a little bit about minstrelsy as an art form and its connotations and what it has done historically to black people in this country, and you're watching this movie coming in knowing all of that. So the audience is going to see this as predisposed, I would think, to be sympathetic to it. I would hope.
Yes. And then speaking of, let's get into the synopsis right away. So Pierre Delacroix, whose real name in the movie is Pierre-Lis Dothan, played by Damon Wayans, is an uptight Harvard-educated African-American man in the employment of television network CNS. Now, that's interesting, right? Because Damon Wayans in this movie has the most weird affectation in his accent I've ever heard in my life. Well, and it's interesting, too, because they call it out in the movie. He's like, you don't even sound white.
It's such a great joke.
Yeah, because he puts on this obviously extremely fake accent, because we actually meet his dad, who's played by Paul Mooney, the legendary
the great Paul
comedian,
Mooney.
R.I.P. Paul Mooney, who just died a couple years ago. But either way, like, he's like, where the fuck did you get that accent from?
It's not even like an ethno accent. It's a weird cartoon of like an erudite person.
Yeah, he's not like Dave Chappelle being like, hello, my name is Dave Chappelle. This is my white voice.
It's not the white guy voice. It's
you know what it sounds like? It sounds like a French person trying to do a transatlantic accent. That's what it sounds like.
That's a good way to
No, it's awesome, yeah. At work, he endures torment from his boss, Thomas Dunwitty, played by Michael Rappaport. Now, on the last episode, Brian, that you recommended a Michael Rappaport movie, I did not want to talk about him because he's a piece of shit in real life. He's a genocide apologist.
We have to here, though.
He's the most white guy who appropriates African-American culture, because I'm not using the other word because I don't want to get canceled. He is just a terrible person in real life. Honestly, one of my least favorite people in entertainment, and that's fucking saying something. But in this movie, he plays himself. If he was actually rich and successful, Michael Rappaport would be playing himself in this movie. That's literally who he is. He is a boorish fucking piece of shit who's racist. He uses the N-word. He
understands black culture better than anyone else, and it's okay for him to. And the thing is, that is Rappaport. He is someone that grew up in relatively close proximity to black people, and he's in movies like Poetic Justice and like a lot of other like prominent like black movies. And there's actually like a mini essay it was written by a video essayist. It's an actual essay about like a type of person, and he uses Rappaport as an example. I think it was Bill or FD Signifier. It was someone that wrote a thing on Substack or Medium or something, but they were talking specifically about Rappaport as this example of a guy who, like, because he has this marginal experience as like a white guy with black people, he is like completely out of pocket. And it kind of like inadvertently leads to him becoming, or revealing that he's this insane racist because he feels so comfortable like acting that way and feeling like he should be allowed to. And that is who Rappaport is, and that is who he's playing in this movie. And no fucking shit, I read today that apparently Rappaport didn't have a finished script and this is Spike Lee saying this. Spike Lee and Rappaport have publicly feuded over the last few years, as you can imagine. Spike Lee says that Rappaport like improvised most of his lines in this movie, or that he was riffing most of the time. And when you learn that, you're like, oh shit, that's why he's so good at this character.
No, he's literally not even acting. He's just literally being himself, which should say something. But yeah, so they go to blows because Dunwitty's like, oh, I don't want any of this Cosby show type shit, which is hilarious, obviously, given what Cosby's been revealed to have done since this movie came out, but that's not here nor there. I mean, everybody's made that observation, but that's not here nor there. Because obviously Bill Cosby was a big respectability politics, and then he raped like 60 plus women, so I mean...
And respectability politics are what allowed him to do that for so long and get away with it, which is why he was such a fierce advocate for them.
So it actually makes Delacroix, even the things that he does in this movie, pretty disgusting. Actually makes him a better person because at least he's not doing respectability politics. And he's also trying to do things just to get out of a contract too, essentially.
So he doesn't do respectability politics. He doesn't do the Cosby thing. He does a thing that I know people have always done, but that we're seeing even more now. In fact, relating to the Kanye thing, we're seeing, there's a thing in this movie called the Mantan Manifesto, right? And I feel like the things that they talk about in there are things that with the rise of social media, and especially with like the ascendancy of like Trump Republicans, you're seeing those tactics utilized on a near daily basis, right?
Yes, absolutely. And once we get to that point, I'm very excited, but I think that's definitely later in this.
That's a ways down.
Yeah. In an effort to escape his contract through being fired, Delacroix develops a minstrel show, which once again we talk about minstrel show, with the help of his personal assistant, Sloane Hopkins, played by Jada Pinkett Smith, our other second IRL villain in this fucking cast here.
Yeah. But
although, I will say though, Brian, I think you and I can both agree that Jada Pinkett and Tupac really should have just stayed together.
I wouldn't wish that upon Tupac. No, I do want to say something.
I mean, to be fair, Brian, he was a convicted rapist, okay? He was a bad person, too.
Yeah, and he still didn't deserve to be with Jada. Joseph said, I kind of think, like, I didn't know anything about Will Smith and Jada Pinkett's relationship until the slap, and I don't think most people did. And I don't think, like, obviously, I don't think I like either of those people, but there was this eagerness of people to suddenly, people who I know didn't know anything about Jada Pinkett Smith, to be like, she's actually really horrible. And it's like, I don't know, didn't you just learn about all this like 2 weeks ago?
Honestly though, Brian, I did know about the Will Smith Jada
Not
Pinkett
you,
thing because
not you.
Oh, yeah, but other people, yeah, totally. Like, because I'd watched interviews with him for years, and there's so many like embarrassing interviews with Will Smith. Where did you see the one with like him and Michael Caine and like a couple other guys?
I have
like,
seen, yeah.
That one's so sad. It's basically, I'm not gonna repeat the whole thing, but it's basically like a girl cheated on me years ago, and the way that I got around that was I wanted to be the most famous guy in the world, and Michael Caine just looks at him like, "Oh, you poor fool."
That is actually like very Durstian thing to say.
Yes, really. It came into this world as a reject. Minstrel show's name is Mantan, the new Millennium Minstrel Show, featuring actual actors in blackface, extremely racist jokes and puns, and offensively stereotyped animated cartoons. Now, I will say, before we get to the actual like minstrel show segments, because we're not going to get too in-depth with them, because I think everybody knows what the fuck a minstrel show is. But I will say it's interesting, right, is that this movie is probably one of the few examples I can think of that accurately like portrays what a minstrel show was like in like at least relatively high def and like quality, which I think that makes this film very significant in a way because it shows you the horror. Yeah, as an archive, essentially. Yeah, it shows you the horror of what that art form was in a way that's not like black and white and it was so long ago. Nobody remembers. Like minstrel shows were done well within people's lifetimes. People's lifetimes.
So they make a point. I think this is that's a credit to Spike Lee. I think is that obviously he comes at like you said, when he talks about like black history, he comes at it with a lot of knowledge and a lot of thoughtfulness, and he puts a lot of things on display. Like this is something too that like I have never seen this much of a minstrel show like actually being done, or something this close to an approximation to it. I don't think most people have. And I think the thing that's when you watch it too is that the movie does show you exactly like what it is, and it's disquieting, but you also know that like what's the whole bit of the movie, right? That it's made to be like this outlandish, so beyond the pale thing in 90s end of history America, and what happens, people love it. But the other thing I think with the minstrelsy thing is that Spike Lee he makes a point to make it like a well-produced program. And that's kind of the joke, right? Is that all these really talented actors and performers are in a position where they have to do this work. The actor that plays Mantan is like a pretty famous dancer, like a kind of like interpretive dance performer who like this was supposed to be in some way like kind of his big break, was being cast as Mantan in this film.
Yes, and speaking of, so you mentioned it, so they recruit two impoverished street performers, Man Ray, played by Savion Glover, and Womack, played by Tommy Davidson, who I was so confident that was Taye Diggs, but then I looked it up, it was not Taye Diggs, Tommy Davidson. No. He looks a lot like Taye Diggs, and I'm like, they got Taye Diggs in this movie, but they did not. And of course, I only know Taye Diggs from fucking Equilibrium, that's the only thing I really know him from, but he was obviously a famous actor.
His greatest role,
absolutely. The guy who got his face cut off by Christian Bale and that horrible CGI cut off face in that movie.
What a movie.
Yeah. While Womack is horrified when Delacroix tells him details about the show, Man Ray sees it as his big chance to become rich and famous for his tap dancing skills. And then once again, to Delacroix's horror, not only does Dunwinnie enthusiastically endorse the show, it also becomes hugely successful, which he does talk about in the movie. He's like, I feel like Frankenstein's monster because he did this whole thing to get fired, but he does this thing that basically like is the most racist thing ever on TV, and it's highly successful, and he's the man behind it. Now he has to basically defend himself from this horrible thing that he created. It's kind of wild.
Yeah, he becomes immediately, even like he is for a moment horrified that it doesn't have the effect that he expected, and then he immediately becomes extremely defensive towards his critics, even though he made it with the knowledge that it was all of those things, that it was hateful and ignorant and racist, right?
Well, and that's the thing, this movie's I think kind of supposed to be like a modern day like black version of The Producers to a certain extent. Am I wrong about that?
No, I think that's absolutely an influence on this. The basic premise of it is right there. I guess it's like what if like a black filmmaker did the equivalent of The Producers, and how would they live with like the feeling of that they were putting that out there, and also that people were consuming it so readily,
No, absolutely. And then later on, Hopkins, we meet Hopkins' older brother, Julius, played by the actual real life rapper Mos Def, who becomes increasingly angry at the show's content. And they also auditioned, and the audition scenes are hilarious because they get a bunch of performers who basically just do like racist versions of whatever their act is at the same time to be on this extremely racist show. Like there's one guy who's like, I smack my hoes and I beat my bitches. He's like supposed to be like a pimp or something. I don't even know if that's like, supposed to be a bit.
He's doing a little bit of like a Teddy Pendergrass kind of gravelly soul singer thing.
Yeah, it's absolutely hilarious. Also, at one point, the backing band of the minstrel show is the actual real life group, The Roots. Of course, very famous band. I think they were on Stephen Colbert's show or The Late Show or whatever fucking show that was. And obviously a bunch of other shit that they were on too. Eventually, we get, like I said, all the minstrel show segments. I'm not going to get into them because they're just horrifying to watch. But just imagine the most racist shit you've ever seen in your entire life. That's basically what it is. But yeah, so eventually we get the montage. You know, we get the success of both Mantan and Womack and all that. Eventually they quit the show, and then Man Ray, that's the actual character's name, not Manton, because I think Manton was the name of a performer back in the day. Oh yeah, they mentioned it. That's right.
It is.
And then eventually he does his whole like, you know, he drops the kayfabe basically, and he goes on the show being like, fucking look at me, I'm the real guy, and he starts tap dancing, he gets thrown out. Eventually he gets, actually like right afterwards, he gets kidnapped by the Mau Mau rap group and fucking Mos Def. I love the segment because they put him on the internet. They're like, we're gonna fucking kill Mantan. You get to watch it on the internet. And he's like, don't worry, it's going to be on the internet. They won't be able to find us out at all, which is hilarious because
it's
knowing
awesome.
that nowadays, if those idiots had done that, 4chan would have found them out in 30 seconds.
One of my favorite things, and it's not necessarily that I like everything about, one of the most interesting things about this film to me is the portrayal of the Mau Maus, because like there are a lot of like parodies of black radicalism in like 90s comedy. Like, right, there's a lot of it in Living Color. There's a character like that in She's Gotta Have It. There's characters like kind of proto-Hotep characters, and I'm Gonna Get You, Sucker, and even in like Mr. Show and shit like that, right? And it is funny, and there's like things, especially for, I'd say, someone like the Wayans brothers, who were pretty funny and pretty good at satire, there's things worth making fun of. But I feel like when Spike Lee's doing it, he's kind of has more complicated feelings about the Mau Maus. There's seems like a level of the Mau Maus, right, is more like joking about cartoonish radicals, which can sometimes be, you know, a little uncomfortable. It's kind of discrediting black radicalism as a movement. It can kind of suck. But there's also like things the Mau Maus say and references they make throughout the film that are a little bit more thoughtful. And I kind of wonder if Spike Lee is also kind of identifying with the Mau Maus, like, well, you know, kind of clowning on them.
Yeah, no, I can see that too, because, you know, it's one of those things, right, where like the Mau Maus themselves, like Mos Def's character is clearly just somebody who's kind of dumb. Like he has these ideas of like radicalism, and he has these like grand ideas of like a more equitable and fair world, but he's just a giant idiot at the end of the day. Like his vocabulary is extremely limited. Like his ideas are pretty like not far reaching. You know, his friends are also pretty dumb too. They basically just are echoing all of his points. They're like fucking preaching to the choir. They have one guy in there who's 1/16, that's his name is 1/16 Black, who's actually a real life rapper who in real life sold NFTs. So he's a real smart guy too in real life. But either way, right? Like it's one of those things where like there is obviously some level of merit to what they're trying, outside of when they actually, you know, spoilers ahead, but they kill Man Ray, like actually murder him on fucking broadcast. But at the same time, right, like there is some positive critique, I think, for, you know, these kind of like black radicals and stuff. They just have to have their energy be put towards, I would say, more intellectual pursuits. You know, the best way I can describe it is, you know, we've talked about hot couch guys, right? And we've mostly talked about white hot couch guys. This is a black hot couch guy. That's who Mos Def's character is in this movie.
I would agree with that, especially like in this particular character. I think one of the big, like, I think an intentionally ambiguous question that the movie lets hang is like, for the Mau Maus to kill Man Ray is like, why not kill De La Croix or kill Rappaport's character, right? And even there is like an argument, right, that it would make more sense as a radical act to kill Man Ray as like a symbol, right? But I think that's sort of, at least that's what I always think when I watch this, is like, isn't it weird that they killed this guy who is also being exploited by the system and isn't really a perpetrator of it, you know?
You know, Brian, obviously talk about how Mantan was killed by the Mau Maus, and you said it would make more sense if like Dunwoody or Delacroix were killed. But that's the thing, though, is that like historically speaking, a lot of radicals don't have access to these high tier individuals who are actually causing their issues. So they oftentimes will kill collaborators who at least they see as collaborators, instead of people who are oftentimes victims of that same like violence and exploitation.
Well, there's that, and I think that might even be like I do think that's part of what Spike Lee is saying, and that we've actually seen now Man Ray's gone through this transformation and had this epiphany, and he still gets killed for it. And obviously, I think Spike Lee's aware of the inherent contradiction in there and the historical precedent for it. I also was thinking like, oh boy, if he had done what he died, that might have put him. Obviously, Spike Lee was already in the line of fire with critics, and you have criticism of Spike Lee. I think a lot of them are warranted and valid, but I also think he's gotten a lot of criticism, especially from kind of like mainstream like publications and film critics that are pretty unwarranted. At this particular time, I was thinking, oh, I bet if he had Michael Rappaport killed by black radicals, people would have gone crazy. People would have
that's the thing, Brian. It would have been anti-Semitic. I'm not going to get into that. Actually, let's not get into that whole fucking. He would have said that nowadays. He would have been like, oh yeah, when they killed me in that movie, that was mad anti-Semitic, yo.
No, that is probably a thing that he had to reckon with in the making of this movie. It's like, I've made this evil character, but I can't kill him because people are already mad at me stuff.
No, exactly. All right, but yes, after that, then the Mau Mau's get into a shootout with the police where they all die except for 1/16 Black, which is hilarious. Like, no, I'm black. You kill me too. It's very funny, because obviously he's in real life he's played by a Jewish man, which once again they didn't kill him. That would have been anti-Semitic.
They're like dragging him away, and he's saying like, all it takes is one drop of blood, motherfucker, one drop.
Well, that's why he's 1/16 Black. Yeah. But anyways, after that, of course, we go back to Delacroix, who at this point is like had a mental breakdown, and he's also been given the gifts of like all these like antebellum era like fucking minstrel show like keepsakes. He actually like puts blackface on himself, which is interesting too, because like I said, he just had this fucking mental breakdown of what he's basically become. And then Sloane, Jada Pinkett's character, comes and basically threatens him like, look at what you did. And then he, I think, has her pull the trigger on him, right? Like she doesn't actually like shoot him intentionally, but he kind of wants to die, essentially. Is that what that's implying?
No, I think she is prepared to shoot him, but doesn't want. So the last like third of this film, it really becomes like a psychodrama, right? It becomes this person who's like guilt and his own confusion, and
it becomes a literal Greek tragedy.
Yeah, it really does. Yeah, it's very much a Greek tragedy, and it's in that mold, and I think that's very intentional. I think she's ready to shoot him, but doesn't want to, and he just kind of walks right towards her as she's telling him to back away. I don't know if it's that he wants to die or if he's just not really thinking, but Damon Wayans gets shot in a pretty awful confrontation in this movie. And one of the things when I brought up the comparison with Confederate States of America earlier is,
by the way, some real quick though, Brian, some foreshadowing is that Jada's like, you made me do it, and you know for a fact that is what she told Will after the slap.
I don't have the big opinions one way or the other as everyone else on that.
I don't either. I was just making a stupid joke.
I was actually thinking about all the other things allegedly that she have said you made me do it for. Like, didn't she? Well, I don't know. Didn't she like have an affair with like an 18-year-old or something? Like,
yeah, her son's friend. Yeah,
that's right. So like, yeah, that is pretty weird, huh?
Yeah, she's not a good person, and I'm obviously not going to get too deep into it.
But she was in that cool
band. New metal band. She was in that shitty new metal band. Yeah.
What were they called?
Wicked Wisdom.
Wicked Wisdom. That's it. I'm gonna watch the footage of that fucking MTV performance they did after this. No, but another thing, like I had said earlier, this movie opens up as ostensibly a comedy, like a dark comedy, a satire, a kind of a rough satire with a perspective on the world. But you expect it to be funny, and I do think this film has funny jokes, and I think it's written in such a way that it's pretty entertaining. But it is not a movie, and especially once you get past the halfway point, it is not a movie that you are gonna laugh at. Like if you're a normal person, I would say. Just the vibe is not funny in that way. It almost like lulls you in. By this point in the movie, you've now been tricked into watching not a farcical satire, but like, yeah, basically a tragedy. Like this horrible not horrible, but this like kind of wrenching psychodrama.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like, and before we get to our final thoughts, Brian, I do have some. Oh, actually, one more quick thing before we get to the Amazon reviews. So the movie ends with basically a video montage of various things from let's get the antebellum Jim Crow era of like racist caricatures and stuff, just like how CSA did. How CSA in that movie related the fictional universe of the Confederate States winning to the actual real life timeline that we had, and a lot of the racist portrayals and like just racist portrayals of like people and products in that that movie. And then this movie, it's basically that, but it's just showing it instead of actually having like the comparison. Not necessarily that that's saying a bad thing, but that's just what it is.
No, but
and then we see Delacroix die, and then the line from James Baldwin, he said, "Keep them laughing," basically, and then it ends with the smiling minstrel show, and then the credits roll.
Yeah, it's a disquieting movie. So this is one of those movies I love to show to people. I think it's a really cool movie, but it's kind of not a movie you can just toss on and be like, check out this funny comedy, you know. It's pretty heavy, and it is pretty uncomfortable, like intentionally uncomfortable, both in the portrayals of racism, but also just in like the feelings that go along with that. There are things that you really don't see in movies very often.
No, absolutely agree. And then before we get to our final thoughts, before I interrupted myself earlier, but I do have a couple Amazon reviews. Now, Brian, would you believe that the Amazon reviews on here were mostly horrible? Were really people missing the point, way too explanatory on things we already talked about, so it's not worth getting into. But I do have some real dumb ones, and they're mostly very short, but I do have one I want to expound upon because it's so hilarious. But our first review here is a 5-star review from Cherry Pop 11, who gives us 5 stars.
Oh, good.
And the head of the review says, 5 stars. And the body of the review says, a real Spike Lee JOI, which I'm assuming they meant joint, but it was not finished. And it's like a Spike Lee jerk-off instructional? Like, I don't think this is a Spike Lee jerk-off instructional. Did you get instructions how to crank your hog, Brian, from this movie?
Though the only thing that I could assume they mean is that they think that this is Spike Lee, you know, riding his own dick, high off his own supply. But the thing is, and I definitely think Spike Lee has made movies like that since this came out, not so much politically, but just as a filmmaker. But I think, I would say that this movie shows Spike Lee in a terribly conflicted place, if anything.
Honestly, though, Brian,
I did jerk off to it, though.
I was going to say, when I jerk off, I'm often in a very conflicted place, if you know what I mean.
I don't know if I'm coming or going.
Yeah. And speaking of people who are in very conflicted places, our next person gives this 3 stars. Jen on Amazon, once again, gives us 3 stars. And the head of the review says, a bizarre relic not unlike the relics that appear throughout the film itself. And the body of the review says, interesting but not really believable in 2021 when blackface is canceled. I never saw it until now, even though it was made like 20 years ago. Which, by the way, 2021 was not when blackface was canceled. It was canceled way before that. Like, what, 50 years prior to that? 60 years prior to that?
I mean, nobody could be insanely racist like this now and get popular.
Well, that's the thing, Brian. I think you and I can agree that George Floyd ended racism. I think that's what they're saying.
Yeah, I think you're right. But not really believable. I mean, the thing is that Dave Chappelle literally quit his own show a few years after this movie came out for reasons that this movie discusses. Fuck Dave Chappelle now, obviously. Well, fuck that guy. Yeah, but you know what I mean?
No, absolutely. And then on top of it, too, it's one of those things where... That's the thing, though, is that, humiliation of, black performers and, these, very... You talk about the humiliation ritual thing, which I think is kind of overblown, to be honest with you. But, that is a thing that does exist. The black man has to put on a fucking dress for comedy. Because emasculization of black men is, humorous.
Taking away that, sort of presumed authority that they might have. We didn't talk a lot about Paul Mooney, because I don't... He's great. He's an institution, what could we possibly say about him? But that is probably my favorite scene in the movie just to watch, is the scene with Paul Mooney as Delacroix's father, just because he's great and it's Paul Mooney. But it also brings up an interesting thing where, Delacroix is kind of, in his head, he's comparing himself to his father. When he meets his father, he's basically being Paul Mooney. He's doing stand-up in small clubs and he's telling, edgy jokes. He is telling edgy jokes, or he's doing, racialized comedy, right? It's Paul Mooney. It's not, piffle. But it's, I think throughout and he's very poor, obviously. He's a working man. But so Delacroix is saying, well, if it's okay for him to make jokes like that, it should be okay for me to do it, and kind of justifying it to himself that way. But that is how people still make these jokes now. The Mantan Manifesto is a real thing where you have these kind of canned responses of well, it's satire, and it's satire of what, you absolutely could still make a show like this now. Maybe not exactly like this, but you
Well, and that's the thing, though, right, is that one of the things that I have about this movie, and it is a very heavy-handed satire, and nothing wrong with that. I like heavy-handed satires. But the thing that when people are this isn't realistic, blah, blah, blah. But the thing is that, if they wanted to make something like this that could be realistic for a TV show nowadays, you wouldn't honestly have to make it that different. It would be one of those things where it would be I had this thought earlier, right, and this is just an idea. But if it's one of those, isekai things, an anime thing or whatever, where, a minstrel show actor is like taken through a time loop and brought into the modern era. It's like a fish out of water story, and he has to like adjust to modern day, but he still has those like extremely racist like show tune sensibilities to him. He's trying to make a successful show, but he somehow makes that while like integrating it into modern humor. Wouldn't be that difficult, to be honest with you. So it's one of those people are like, this isn't realistic, and it's like, well, it's just an extreme version of what is already like in the zeitgeist of like popular culture when it comes to racist portrayals.
That is literally how satire works. Yeah. Also, I hate when people watch a movie and they go, well, it's not realistic. Yeah, it's a fucking movie. Like,
yeah, there has to be a little bit of suspension of disbelief. Yeah.
Like, it always makes me think of, as a kid, I was watching Billy Madison with my dad, and we get to the scene where he's in like kindergarten and he's playing dodgeball with all the kids, and my dad suddenly throws up his hands, outraged, and says, there is no way that any school in the country would allow this.
You know, Brian, you have said that on previous episodes, but it's such a funny story that I love hearing it every time. It's so good.
I know, and I knew as I was saying, I must have said this before, but it's just so many people in these Amazon reviews, this isn't real, this really happened. Like, yeah, have you ever seen a movie before? What, do you only watch, like, documentaries, which also aren't usually real?
And, you know, that's the thing. I was watching a little bit of content related to, obviously, once again, negative portrayals of Black Americans just before we recorded this. And there is a Onion, like, snippet that's so funny where it's BET is bought by a white supremacist group and has no change in content, which is very true. Like, did you know that there's a rap group that I was watching the music video for? It was a band called, and I don't know if you're familiar with them, Brian, they're Little Brothers, like a North Carolina rap act.
I don't know them.
But BET decided not to show them because they said the music video was quote unquote too intellectual. It's literally just guys partying in like a 2000s like rap video. I'm like, how is this too intellectual?
Hang on, is this real?
No, I'm dead serious. I could find the article for you. I'll find the article for you after we're recording. I'm dead serious.
Yeah, this is blowing my mind. I mean, I actually think that BET in like the 2000s, similar to how like MTV at one point made pretty good content and a lot of slop because it's cable news. I think there's like a period of time where there's kind of a standard bar for them. I don't even know what they make now. I assume that they make a lot of like reality TV and that they probably market to like much older people, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And, you know, of course, we talk about another Black radical. Of course, Aaron Magruder has a myriad of issues with BT, or at least did when he was doing the Boondocks. I don't know if I'm sure he still does.
Yeah, I think this is, and you and I, not on the show, but ourselves have talked about this. Aaron Magruder is a guy with a lot of opinions, and I don't like all of them. But similar to like with Spike Lee, I would say I like Magruder.
I think the Boondocks is fucking...
It's great.
One of the best cartoons ever.
Yeah, great cartoon. The comic strip, also great. Amazing that he got that published in like national syndication. Awesome that happened. People always throw out, they go like, you know, Magruder's a 9/11 truther. And it's like on the spectrum of like bad conspiracy theories that people can believe. It's
like, I don't really care that bad.
Also, is it that untrue? Like, okay, maybe he didn't literally do 9/11, but he may as well have with how much he benefited from it. So it's like...
I mean, to be clear, and this one's not even a conspiracy theory. This is the only time we're ever going to talk about the 9/11 conspiracy theory. I promise you. But there is a point in like 9/11 research that I found that the only reason that they know who the quote unquote hijackers of the various flights, and of course there were hijackers, was because they found their passports on like the ground level of Manhattan. Yeah, I'm sure those absolutely survived.
Which is like, come
on. They found passports, perfectly intact passports. Are you fucking kidding me? Of course that's not true. Like, really? Come on.
Like, yeah, there's things with the Boondocks, of course, like with this movie where you watch both Spike Lee and Magruder get a lot of criticisms from people. Like, especially, I think there's a thing, and again, I'm not the best person to talk about this, but I feel like in the 2010s, like, you know, Taylor, people like you and I, you know, like kind of left-leaning white people learned about like hoteps as a concept, and then every time they see something that's like black radicalism, they go like, well, that's hotep.
I have a very famous bit where I shit on hotep, so I'm not immune to that.
Like, well, obviously there's bad things. Well, I am a hotep. I think we've said this on the show before.
No, we're honky teps, Brian. We're honky teps. We've talked about this.
Yeah. I was made by Yakub. I'm a demon. I don't like it.
I was made by Yakub, don't you know?
What's that tweet by some like awful lib that was like, it was a Trump era tweet when there were protests going on in DC, and he said like, DC has been conquered by a beautiful black race of superhumans and I hope they never leave.
Oh God, I'm not familiar with that. Jesus
I'll
Christ.
find it for you. Anyway, but so I think Spike Lee, Magruder, a lot of like kind of radical adjacent like black artists who get a degree of popularity. You see this like with like artists like Dead Prez, who I think I talked about last episode, where all of a sudden like people like kind of like liberal institutions are really enthusiastic to go like, actually this is bad, and it's like, well, yeah, things about it are bad, but it's like maybe we're all a little too excited to like be like, this is actually bad and you shouldn't listen to any of it. You know what I mean?
Well, Brian, speaking of people who are very excited to shit on successful artists, that actually leads perfectly into our next Amazon review from R. Gunther. And if you see somebody named R. Gunther, they have very good opinions on like black.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm thinking. Is this like a member of like Christian Identity?
Yeah, right. But they give this 2 stars. And the head of the review says, not a funny movie. And the body of the review says, with all the famous successful black comedians in this movie, I expected it to be funny. But no, it was not funny. I guess it has some value in that it shows how black people were depicted in those old movies. But please don't forget, oh, by the way, Brian, this is incredible. But please don't forget that race relations have evolved very much in these modern times. Please don't forget that a major war was fought in large part to end slavery, and a whole lot of white men died fighting in that war.
This person is so fucking racist.
It gets even better. Dr. M.O.K. Jr. knew that he set a great example by urging people not fill themselves with hatred, but instead be assured that racial equality and harmony would eventually overcome. There are a million examples to point to that prove that we are either there already or at least very close here in the 21st century. Thank goodness.
Is like a member of One Life Crew write this review? Did like Chubby Fresh from One Life Crew write this? Imagine what this person is like in private.
Oh, I do know, Brian, because I have another Amazon review I wanted to highlight, and it's very funny. This one's a short one. But R. Gunther gave this 2 stars in 2020, which is interesting, very interesting timing. But it's for a product, it's Virginia Diner's Zatarain Spicy Cajun Nuts. And the body of the review says, the header of the review says, these peanuts are much hotter than I expected. I can barely stand to eat them. Buyer beware. And the body of the review says, I will have to dump these nuts in water to remove the extremely hot spicy powder. I expected them to be a little hot, but found them to be much hotter than I can tolerate. Why don't they have a choice for you to have mild or medium hot? Yikes, frowny face.
Oh my God. See, this is why I'm going to join Nation of Islam. How do you read things like that? And then, like, yeah, why is this person even watching this movie? Like, how did this person even, like, become interested in Bamboozled by Spike Lee,
Yeah, no, it's crazy, isn't it? Like, just R. Gunther, and then he does the fallacy where it's like, oh yeah, this country that enslaved black people, but a lot of white people, like, died to free it. Well, also, a lot of black people died doing the labor, so I don't know what the fuck to tell you. And a lot of black people died, by the way, trying to overturn slavery on top of it. Like, Jesus Christ.
And also after slavery.
That is also very true.
A lot of black people were still murdered, continuously.
Oh, Jesus. And then our final Amazon review, Brian, is going to be your favorite. I know that. So, G, I believe he had a unit, but he's just going by G this time. Gave this 1 star. And the head of the review says, I was bamboozled. And the body of the review says, I was bamboozled. I ordered a DVD, but was sent a VHS tape. Pretty useless item since I have no way to view it.
Awesome! No, this person's so fucking lucky they have no idea.
I'm sure that VHS is probably worth a lot of money, to be honest with you.
It's so cool to have a VHS tape of Bamboozled. Fuck, that makes me so mad. And this person was like trash and they threw it out. They set it on fire.
That thing's probably as valuable today. That thing's probably as valuable today as an original copy. Oh yeah, you know what? Let's fucking do it. I got some time. Let's hear. So Bamboozled VHS. I'm gonna go on eBay. Let's see.
Yeah.
Oh, it's only worth a couple dollars. Never mind.
All right. Well, all right. So you're off the hook this time, G.
Yeah. You get your unit together and get your DVD back, goddammit.
This is actually a good episode to ask you. Did you know that Head from Korn, when he made his solo album, made a song about 50 Cent?
Yes, I just listened to the PODcast episode on it. And I will say real quick, this might even be a clip that we do, not even included on the episode, just to be very clear, because it's totally off topic from the movie. Yeah. But I will say, though, too, I think that Brian and Colin, I think, totally give him way too much credit. He's definitely a right-wing shithead who clearly knew what he was doing when he was on the fucking Huckabee show and writing songs about abortion. I thought the same thing. Like, he is stupid, don't get me wrong, but he's not that stupid. He understands what he's saying and what he's doing. 100%. Yeah,
I thought so too, because like I don't believe that you would go on the Huckabee show without knowing who he was. I don't believe that you would go on that Fox News circuit accident.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
Yeah, it would be like talking to fucking David Duke and being like, oh yeah, here's a fucking cool old white guy. Like, you know who the fuck David Duke is.
I actually was curious if you listen to that episode because I thought the same thing where I was like, I don't know a lot about Head and I know he's dumb. I know he said the thing about Head like a hole, but I mean, I don't think he's that dumb.
No, he's not. He's absolutely not. And also, on top of it, too, they're like, oh, it was really shitty when he just, like, dropped out of the band like that. And it's like, well, you have to understand the fucking mindset that dude was coming from. Like, he was pretty much on the verge of dying. Like, him running away and trying to get better, that was probably the thing that saved his life, to be honest with you. I'm being dead serious. He probably would overdose otherwise.
It sounded very, like, fan of the band type talk, you know?
Yeah, it's one of those things, right, where, like, he did what he had to do. He had to run away, basically. And, like, it's not like he, like, fucking murdered somebody to, like, get away. He wrote an email being like, I just have to leave. Please understand. I'm sorry, but there's just nothing to talk about. That's fine.
I mean, like,
if that's what it takes for you to live, who cares?
Yeah, the email thing, obviously that sucks to have to tell your partners of, like, 10 years by email. Maybe that's what you have to do, you know?
No, absolutely, yeah. They were just, I think, putting too much of their parasocial thoughts into it. It's really not that deep, guys.
I've never done that with a podcaster. I've never sent death threats to the ex-girlfriend of one of my friends.
You know, talk about Head and talking about King of Kings. I think that ends our episode here. Now, let's get to our final thoughts before we get to our pluggables. Now, this was technically my episode, but this was your suggestion. But I'm just going to go first real quick, Brian, because I have a lot less experience with this movie than you do. But I did like this movie quite a bit. I thought the performances were all great. You know, Michael Rappaport, who, of course, like I said, I do not like, and I've never liked him, frankly, in anything. But this is the closest I've ever liked him in because he is literally just playing himself, and I do begrudgingly respect
just
that.
A demon.
Just for him being a literal demon in real life. And you know, in general, of course, Damon Wayans is always great. You know, he's fucking great in basically everything I've ever seen him in. He was in Major Pain, right?
In Major Pain, in Living Color, I'm Gonna Get You, Sucker. I mean, look, I love the Wayans. I watched Paranormal Activity last year, and it made me laugh, okay? I've watched 50
The first two
Shades
scary
of Black.
movies are incredible. The first two scary movies are incredible parodies.
Yeah, although I rewatched Scary Movie a couple weeks ago, and I was like, God, this is still pretty funny. I was kind of feeling bad about it. I was like, oh, this is still pretty good.
It's one of the few, like, 2000s, 90s, like, gay humor that actually, I think, works really well for me. Like, he's so good at being gay in that movie. Or, what? No, that was his brother, I think, right?
Yeah, that's his brother.
Keenan Ivory? Okay.
Yeah, this is not, Bulletproof, one of my favorite dumb movies. I love Bulletproof. Bamboozled and Bulletproof, for me, are, like, definitive Wayans movies. He's great in it. The voice he does, which must be a voice he developed, because, like we said, it's not based off any accent. It's great.
No, like I said, it's basically the French version of trying to do a transatlantic accent or something. That's probably the best way I can, like, describe it. It's just absolutely fucking hilarious. But yeah, so I like this movie a lot. I like the portrayals of just the horror of, like, minstrel showery in general. Like I said, I like the fact that they have, like, a modern day minstrel show with, like, at least reasonable high definition, because those were the only scenes actually shot with, like, high definition, or, like, was it 35 millimeter, I think, camera to film, or 16 millimeter, sorry. But either way, like, it's cool seeing that, even though it's obviously horrifying, but it's good to have that as, like, a historical, like, modern relic, like antiquated relic to a certain degree, I guess you could describe it.
Yeah.
And yeah, all the performances are great. The movie's not too long. Like, it is a little long. It's a little over 2 hours, but I think it doesn't overstay its welcome. I think the commercial parodies are great. They're on the same level as, like, CSA. They're, like, great commercial parodies, like the Tommy Hill N-word, which I'm not going to say, and the Malt Liquor ad are amazing.
Like, the first half of CSA is almost like someone saw the commercial parodies from this movie and were like, oh, I could do a whole movie out of those.
Yeah, the CSA, like, parody commercials are, like, incredible. Some of the best parody commercials of all time, I would say.
I might watch that tonight after this episode.
No, fucking hell yeah. But yeah, so overall, I would 100% recommend this. I would say this is maybe my second or third favorite Spike Lee movie as well.
After Oldboy?
After Oldboy. Oh my God, I love the Oldboy remake. As I've said before, Brian, is that Spike Lee definitely understands other cultures outside of, like, the black diaspora.
I think we talked about it just last week, but I was so excited for that remake because you had shown me the original Oldboy, and I am a pretty big Spike Lee fan, and I'd say I was a bigger Spike Lee fan at the time, so I was like, Spike Lee's doing Oldboy, you know, and then we saw it, and it's just garbage.
Yeah, absolute fucking dog shit. Although I know that's not entirely his fault, but I'll be honest, it probably was mostly his fault. I would say it's a good 65% his fault, I would say.
He put his name on it. He has to take credit for it.
No, absolutely. But yeah, so those are my final thoughts. Brian, do you have any final thoughts before we get to our pluggables?
Yeah, so this is possibly my favorite Spike Lee movie. Between this and Do the Right Thing, I really like She's Gotta Have It. I think that's a really underrated Spike Lee film. This is, to me, probably, I don't know if it's his most underrated film, but it kind of, for me, shows him in a transitional period. obviously now you see him, he did BlacKkKlansman, which I liked a lot. Well, was a more accessible kind of version of the Spike Lee film. And then he's done more kind of, I guess, human interest type character studies, which are also pretty good. But this is kind of, this is him filmed in the late 90s, released in the dawn of the new millennium. This is kind of that transitional movie because Spike Lee, as we've said throughout, he was a pretty radical figure. In it, what he was saying explicitly and just in his existence in the mainstream studio system was pretty radical. And this film, you see, he's now kind of established. He's been doing it for a while. And it's kind of about that internal conflict of his, right? That trying to maintain that radicalism, or who are you and what are you serving while working within this system, This is, of course, after Malcolm X, which he had a horrible time fighting with his studio, trying to make the right way or what, But it's crazy to me that this movie exists and was released. Obviously, it bombed, but for a director of his level to put out a movie like this, which, is politically insane. And I think maybe in the 2000s, people would notice less because as far as, mainstream, white America is considering, there was a feeling of post-racialness, I think. It might get more attention now, but it's such an unnerving movie. It's really unflinching, and it is, I know I've used this word a few times, it's disquieting. It's unnerving. It's unnerving because you have, as you said, this archive of minstrelsy that we've never really gotten before that is high quality and pretty accurate as far as anyone can tell. Spike Lee definitely seems to have done the research, but also just what he's saying, and that both what he's saying explicitly and in the undercurrent of the film it's pretty bold. It's like CSA, if CSA had been made by this massive director. I don't think Spike Lee could have had any intention for this film to do theatrically well, but it's so uncompromising. I admire that so much because, boy, he must have gotten a lot of pushback from this.
No, absolutely. And, of course, you mentioned CSA, we've mentioned the Chappelle Show and, the Boondocks, which was contemporaneous with this movie, at least the comic strip was. But this movie really was ahead of its time in a lot of ways when it came to edgy racial comedy. This, and to a certain extent, Bulworth, too, because Bulworth, I would say, is not as radical as this movie, but was a movie that was pretty politically radical for its time. Another famous box office bomb, too.
Yeah, another movie that had to be pushed through by its auteur visionary at the helm, almost at war with the box office, both of those movies. This is important for me. I'm going to release it, almost like an antagonistic act towards movie theaters to put out either of those movies.
No, absolutely. But yes, so that is our review of Bamboozled. Now let's get into our pluggables. So you can follow me at Carlos Chantor on twitter.com. And as well, please subscribe and follow us on both of our YouTube and our Spotify channel, where we are uploading every episode simultaneously to both platforms. And as well as always, please donate to the Lucifer And The Father campaign. Our good friends Scott, Sean, Robert are creating a fantastic series, actively creating future episodes of their series. Of course, they have episode 1, made and released now. But Brian, are they still in pre-production as of recording?
They're going to be working on it for a while. So I check in with Scott occasionally. I think I last spoke to him about a week ago. So it is happening. The show has been they have funds to do it. They know what they're going to do for at least the first few episodes, or they know kind of the direction the show will take. But they're going to be in pre-production. I think they've pushed back production a while. Scott has an idea when, but I don't know if he has a really confident release date time that he wants to give out. But they're just kind of tightening up the script, I think.
No, absolutely. So once again, they are absolutely working on future episodes. So I think more than ever, and we've been saying this for the last few weeks, but I would say more than ever, definitely donate to the campaign. And, as we always say, if you send us an email, send us a YouTube comment, just send us proof that you donated. We will, within reason, match those donations about $20-25 because we want to see Scott, Sean, and Robert's dream show. And of course, it's already becoming a reality, but we want it to become even more of a reality with even more episodes and even more content produced in the series and in the universe of the series.
Well, yeah, we say it every episode, pretty ambitious concept for a low budget independent series. And I think that's why they're taking their time with, they have it ready, the ball is rolling, but they want to make sure that those first few episodes out the gate are what they want it to be. Since they're asking people for money, I think they want to make sure that they do right by everyone that donated. And I think that's part of why they're working not leisurely, but they're not rushing it, I think, is from what I gather from when Scott and I talk about it. They want to make sure they do it right because they asked people for funds.
No, absolutely. But, Brian, speaking of people who are taking their time and doing it right, I think that also leads perfectly into another campaign we believe very strongly in, which is the Luigi Mangione Defense Fund. Now, there haven't been any new revelations since the paralegal listening into him and his lawyer's conversations on the phone. But either way, of course, as always, Luigi has the world stacked against him, both federal and state courts in New York City, and of course, federal government going after him. So now, more than ever, just as always, we need to support Luigi. Of course, both Brian and I have donated to the campaign. It is official. It has now well over 1 million donations. I think it's 1.1 million last time I checked. So Luigi is getting the financial help that he rightfully deserves as a completely innocent person. Not guilty. He is just frankly innocent. Like,
He's
just straight
innocent.
up. We need to understand that.
He is innocent beyond a reasonable doubt. They have no substantial evidence against him.
No evidence that, to be honest with you, Brian, that you or I might not have if we were picked up in the same situation.
Exactly. It's all speculative, weird, like esoteric bullshit that they're like, well, he could have been doing this or thinking, you know what I mean?
He had negative feelings on healthcare corporations. Yeah,
wow.
We all do.
Yeah, like literally the whole fucking world.
As I said in a previous episode, Brian Thompson had 100 million ops. It could be anybody. It could be my mom, who also has extremely negative opinions on fucking
Right. It could
United
be
Healthcare.
Like across the political spectrum. You can throw a rock and find someone who has had a life-altering negative interaction with a health insurance company.
Yeah, including somebody who was just outside my apartment screaming at the bus stop. I'm just kidding. It could be. I don't know if that was that person or not.
He was screaming at his health insurance provider.
But yeah, either way, we support Luigi, definitely support the campaign. And, as we always talk about, of course, also people who are working outside the studio system, we, of course, have a crowdfund/Patreon as well. So please donate to the Patreon. We have some great tiers. Of course, the one that I'm always shilling, because this is the most reasonable in my opinion, is the $5 tier, which gives you every episode up to 48 hours early from when everybody else listens to it. Because as always, Brian, the first 48 hours are the most important. You need to know our opinions on stuff like Bamboozled and African American Psycho, Axum, and fucking Reconciler, and everything.
You need to be ready with the hot takes, because I'm going to tell you, you show up and you're the last person to hear about what the Mao boys are talking about. They are going to rip you a new one, your coworkers. The bullies at school, they're going to shove your head right in a toilet. They're like, did you hear what Taylor and Brian said about the Billy Jack's nephew? And you're going to be like, oh, I haven't heard that one. They're going to be like, fuck you.
They're gonna be 90s bullies, but people who have like obscure knowledge of fucking like 70s quasi-action stars.
Yeah, exactly.
But Brian, speaking of people who are autistic bullies, I think that ends our episode here. So, Brian, I'm feeling bamboozled by life, and I want to fucking fall asleep. That's all I got, really.
I'm going to pass out like Delacroix does towards the end of the film, and hopefully I will not wake up the way that he wakes up.
Abso-fucking-lutely. So have a good night, everybody. Sleep tight, and we're going to come back with a great episode next time, as always.